One of the things that makes the Fallout games so special is the way they encourage players to carve their own paths through the story. They're incredibly dense, so filled with obscure quest lines that it's unlikely players will ever personally experience them all. Yet Fallout has a history, and that history never changes. In this video, we hope to catch you up on what you might have forgotten since the first game came out in 1997, and to remind you of the story beats you may have missed during your own personal journey through the Wasteland. Most importantly, Fallout 4 begins far earlier than any game in the series to date. What better way to begin than at the beginning? The atomic age began in 1945 at the Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico. The Trinity test detonated a bomb called Gadget, and for the first time, a mushroom cloud bloomed over the United States. That same year, the US will attack the Japanese city of Hiroshima. That event, and Japan's eventual surrender, leads to the beginning of the Cold War. From this point forward, the Fallout universe diverges from our own. By 1969, as a hedge against communism, the US shrinks from 50 states to 13 commonwealths. On June 25, 2020, Robert House is born. Educated at MIT, in 2022, he founds Robco Industries. His birth is emblematic of the technological divergence in the Fallout universe, the source of its retro-futuristic style. Analog technology, such as vacuum tubes, persist well into Fallout's 21st century. Culturally, though, it's still very much the 1950s. TVs and radios seem frozen in time at the mid-60s. Meanwhile, atomic energy is put to use in pedestrian applications, even powering the family car. Robert House excelled in all of these fields, helping give birth to many of this universe's robots, including Mr. Handy and, yes, even the Pip-Boy. In April of 2052, the resource wars begin. After the world's oil reserves begin to run dry, Europe invades the Middle East. That next year, the conflict will lead to the first exchange of nuclear weapons fire in human history. As a direct response, in 2054, the US government orders 122 nuclear-proof bunkers, the vaults, be constructed. In 2060, the Middle Eastern oil fields all run dry. With nothing left to fight over, the war in the Middle East ends, and the European Commonwealth dissolves. In 2066, China invades Alaska, seeking to take from the US the last remaining oil fields in the world. And in 2072, the US annexes Canada. Soon after, a secretive governmental organization known as the Enclave hatches a plan. Made up of individuals scattered throughout the US government, the Enclave does not expect the vast majority of Americans to survive a nuclear holocaust. Instead, they make plans to move the president somewhere safe when war inevitably breaks out, and ensure the continuity of government above all else. They take over a secret oil field below the Pacific Ocean, which they fortify with armaments and technologies, in the hope of using it as a base from which to repopulate the country after the radiation subsides. In 2074, before Alaska can be fully liberated from the Chinese, the US invades China, a move that will prove devastating to the military and the morale of the US citizenry. Around that same time, a group of US Army observers are sent to the West Tech Weapons Research Facility in the California desert to investigate the work being done there. On October 10, 2077, Army Captain Maxson discovers that West Tech is using military prisoners to test the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV, a potent biological agent that mutates its victims in bizarre ways. Maxson orders the West Tech scientists executed. Just a few weeks later, on October 23, 2077, the Great War begins. Over a period of 2 hours, the world burns. While no one knows who struck first, nearly every nuclear power launches all of their warheads. The land itself becomes plastic from impacts so powerful they cause the Earth's fault lines to shift, creating mountain ranges and oceans where there were none before. It's at this moment that the story of Fallout 4 begins. Following that devastating attack, the Enclave retreats to the privately owned Poseidon oil rig with the President of the United States in tow. Under his authority, they will continue to be a force in the Fallout universe, for decades to come. One of the bizarre outcomes of the nuclear holocaust is the creation of ghouls, zombie-like necrotic creatures. Some live for hundreds of years and carry with them pre-war knowledge. Meanwhile, at the West Tech Research Facility in California, Captain Maxson and the rest of his team of military observers ride out the war largely unscathed. They march out of the desert to find refuge in the Lost Hills, where they found the Brotherhood of Steel, a quasi-religious group of highly militaristic warriors. In July 2102, Richard Moreau, aka Richard Gray, aka The Master, leads a team of scientists into the now-abandoned West Tech Research Facility. One of the only survivors of the expedition, he is slowly simmered in the FEV for months. No longer human, over the course of years, the Master experiments on any humans it can find, creating the supermutants, hulking greenish monsters immune to disease and radiation. In 2161, the original Fallout game begins on the West Coast at Vault 13. The Overseer sends the player character, referred to as the Vault Dweller, into the Wasteland to find a replacement water chip in order to repair a faulty purification system. Over a year and a half later, the Vault Dweller defeats the Master and saves Vault 13. In a cruel twist, the Overseer banishes the Vault Dweller to the Wasteland, where they found the village of Arroyo. Nearly 70 years later, Fallout 2 begins in Arroyo when the village experiences a terrible drought. Players take the role of the Chosen One, sent out from their village to retrieve the Garden of Eden creation kit. With it, they hope to create a lush green oasis in the wasteland. The game ends with the Chosen One saving refugees from both Arroyo and Vault 13 from the Enclave. In 2258, 180 years after the Great War, the first Bethesda-developed title in the Fallout series begins inside Vault 101. The player character is named the Lone Wanderer. The game ends in 2277 in Washington, D.C., when the Lone Wanderer and his father James reactivate the Purity Project, a water purification system that brings clean water to Washington from within the ruins of the Jefferson Memorial. Back on the West Coast, in 2281, Fallout New Vegas begins. And finally, in 2287, the lone survivor, the protagonist in Fallout 4, leaves Vault 111. Fallout's newest adventure starts here.